Materialism, also called physicalism, is the erroneous idea that all existence is purely physical substance, and that all things, including the mind, reduce down into physical causation. A common thread among the pre-Socratic philosophers of the Greek Ionians, and upheld by Democritus and later by Epicurus. They assert that all knowledge can be known via physical, scientific understanding of matter, and all truth and being can be explained via physical properties and data. For the materialist, the brain is equivalent to the mind. There is no dualism of material versus immaterial, and consciousness is merely created by the brain. Figures such as Paul Churchland and other new atheists, such as Daniel Dennett, assert that the mind is an illusion, as the brain's chemical processes can explain sufficiently all mental properties that exist. A powerful weapon against this notion is from philosopher Frank Jackson, known as the Merry Thought Experiment. Suppose in the future, science has mastered the science of color perception. Suppose that Merry is one such master in this field, knowing all physical data, laws, and brain chemistry that pertains to the color red. From the materialist perspective, Merry should know everything about red, and yet, suppose that she is colorblind. Let's say that Merry loses her colorblindness and experiences the color red for the first time. The question: does her new experience teach her something that she didn't know before? The qualia, or personal experience, a subjective understanding of the color red, is one thing that cannot be explained via physical processes or any material philosophy. The argument is arrayed as follows. All existence and knowledge reduces to physical properties and interactions in materialism. To know everything about the physical world, therefore, is to know everything. Merry knew everything about the scientific nature of the color red and how it exists physically. Miraculously curing her colorblindness, Merry experiences red for the first time, learning the subjective qualia now, as well as the facts of what comprises the color red. Merry, in conclusion, has learned new knowledge, therefore. This is impossible, however, according to materialism, as all knowledge is physical. In conclusion, materialism is false. It is hard to understate the weight of Jackson's argument. In 1974, philosopher Thomas Nagel published a paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, and raised a similar phenomenal, that is, a qualia-based argument against materialism. Yet this paper raised dubious questions about the limits of human cognition and imagination. Thus, materialists argue that humans feasibly could imagine what it's like to be a bat, or could use material data to explain it. The Merry argument, however, evades this pitfall entirely, as even when all physical data on redness is presented, one is still missing the qualia of perceiving red. Thus, not all knowledge and truth is physical. There is also the argument from distinction against materialism. If materialists assert that all that exists is material, then if something is immaterial, it is akin to saying that it does not exist at all. Every entity in the world is distinct from other things or items. There is no substance, energy, or physical thing that makes up distinction. It is purely a concept, therefore, for a materialist philosopher. German philosopher Hegel, in his Science of Logic, makes a point that if there is no distinction, then you have only pure being, which is impossible and does not correspond to reality. Distinction, therefore, must have ontological existence for there to be distinct things. No material ontology can explain how distinction exists. No distinction between things equals pure being. This is impossible. Distinction exists, and distinction is necessarily immaterial by nature. Materialists claim that all that exists is physical. Therefore, distinction does not exist according to the materialist, as it is immaterial. Materialism, then, has no explanation for distinction, and absurdly must conclude that distinction is fake, although it is in fact real and corresponds to reality. Most powerfully against the materialist argument is the argument from quantum physics. At the turn of the 20th century, a primitive understanding of physics led many to support materialism, or realism, where a physical reality exists independent of our observation or of any mind whatsoever. Most rejected idealism, where reality is a mental construct, not existent apart from observation. The double-slit experiment, however, proved that tiny particles of matter behaved more like waves of energy in an inference pattern. than like two bands of particles. But when a measuring device observed the process, the electrons behaved more like a particle. Elaborating on this, the Schrödinger equation reveals that in a state of non-observance, particles exist in a state of a wave function, as a series of potentialities rather than as concrete objects. Many scientists were troubled at these findings, such as Albert Einstein and Schrödinger himself. The former challenged quantum mechanics with a thought experiment. If we were to place two particles in a joint superposition, and then separate them by a great distance, and observe one of them, the idea here, of course, is that observing one will affect the other. But Einstein theorized that the effect couldn't be done instantly, as information cannot travel faster than the speed of light, which would violate relativity. Therefore, Einstein concludes that there must be a physical, local variable that is affecting the particles, and thus quantum mechanics must be either false or misunderstood. In the late 1960s, John Bell considered this challenge and set up an inequality whereby, if false, the local hidden variable theory would be debunked as false, justifying and affirming that matter is dependent on observation as proposed by quantum physics. Physicist Alan Aspect confirmed the inequality was false, meaning that observation truly creates the existence of physical objects. Einstein was wrong, and Anton Zellinger's team further found that another inequality, Leggett's inequality, was also violated, further supporting the evidence for quantum mechanics. Materialists have attempted to challenge the classical doctrine of quantum mechanics with the many worlds theory. The many worlds theory is that the wave function never truly collapses upon measurement. Every possibility merely splits off into different worlds, an ad hoc response to all the evidence for quantum mechanics theory. This is full of holes, without evidence, and inventing numerous worlds which we cannot even detect breaks Occam's razor by multiplying entities unnecessarily. This theory requires a parallel apparatus for the electron in question to travel through, and requires a parallel you, or observer, to exist as well as an entire new universe to exist. The tough question of wave function collapse is traded for the even more grand claim of a distinct parallel universe. This theory is not a coherent model either, and cannot even make predictions about these parallel worlds or whether they exist at all. The reason, of course, why materialists cling to a worldview that has been intellectually dead since 1925 is because largely, if there is no true physical reality, and there is only mind or mental existence, then they are forced to either accept a theistic worldview of idealism, such as Christianity, or accept a radical solipsism, an extreme idealist position whereby only the mind exists, and all else is an illusion. Atheist biologist Richard Dawkins, figures like Sam Harris, and any other materialist are not only in error, but have been since 1925. While you could potentially be an atheist and reject this form of materialism, this is a very tenuous position. In fact, one of the chief philosophical failures of the new atheist movement was the foundational belief in materialism. A tangential doctrine to materialism is scientism. As defined here, the belief is that all truth can be obtained via the scientific method of inquiry through physical experimentation, even to the denial or rejection of logical deduction as a valid means of learning for some. Controversial even among non-theists, it was yet another common thread in the new atheist movement. There is the self-defeating argument against scientism. The claim that science alone is needed for truth claims is held by scientism. Premise 2. The previous claim is held axiomatically. It is not a conclusion gotten to by scientific inquiry. Scientism is self-refuting, and is therefore false. Tangential to the self-refuting nature of this doctrine, science actually operates under several presupposed truths held axiomatically, that is, they are asserted without any previous argumentation, harming the idea that science alone is sufficient for all truth. One such presupposition is the idea of the regularity of nature. Scientists assume the laws of nature to operate not only during times and places of experimentation, but everywhere and at all times. We assume these presuppositions true before even beginning scientific investigation. These assumptions are not given from science, but are foundations which are assumed true for science to even begin from. Thus again, scientism is self-refuting. It goes without saying, of course, that there is also the argument from its connection to materialism. Premise 1. Scientism asserts that all truth and all existing things to be understood via experimentation and science alone. Premise 1 depends on a materialist world ontology of the universe to be true. Materialism is false, and has been intellectually dead since 1925. Therefore, scientism is also false. Against the claims of the materialists and the new atheist movement, which claims that material data and the scientific method is totally sufficient for all truth and understanding all phenomena, the founder of the scientific method and the scientific empirical inquiry himself, Sir Francis Bacon, says, "A little philosophy inclineth man's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy bringeth man's minds about to religion."